The Chinook helicopter descended through a sandstorm of its own creation, rotors beating the Afghan desert into submission. Lieutenant Commander Sarah, Viper, Chen gripped her rifle case tighter as the bird touched down at Forward Operating Base Atlas with a metallic groan that resonated through her bones. She was the first one out, boots hitting the sun-baked tarmac with purpose. The heat slammed into her like a physical wall, 118 degrees of unforgiving Middle Eastern summer. Dust clung to her uniform, her skin invaded her nostrils with each breath. This was her fourth deployment, but the environment never got easier. You just learned to endure. 50 meters away, clustered around the operations tent like vultures waiting for prey, stood the team she'd be working with. SEAL Team 7, Marine Infantry Support, and various Special Operations personnel. All men, all watching her with expressions ranging from curiosity to barely concealed hostility. Staff Sergeant Jake Reynolds stood front and center, arms crossed over his barrel chest, aviator sunglasses reflecting the harsh sun. He was a poster child for Marine infantry, square jaw, regulation haircut, chest full of ribbons that spoke of deployments to Fallujah, Sangin, Ramadi. 15 years of combat experience etched into the lines around his mouth. As Sarah approached, carrying her 80-pound pack and rifle case with practiced ease, Reynolds leaned toward the operator beside him. His stage whisper carried perfectly across the flight line. "She's a Navy SEAL." The question dripped with incredulity, each word coated in mockery. "What's next, Girl Scouts running Delta Force?" Laughter rippled through several of the men. Not all, some shifted uncomfortably, recognizing the line being crossed. But enough joined in to make the message clear. Sarah wasn't welcome here. Her jaw muscles tightened imperceptibly, the only outward sign she'd heard anything. She'd learned long ago that reacting gave them power. Silence was armor. Excellence was the only weapon that mattered. She'd heard worse during Bud's training at Coronado. Hell Week had been exactly that, hell. 130 hours of continuous training, freezing water, sleep deprivation designed to break the human spirit. Of the 142 candidates who started her class, only 19 finished. She was the only woman. The instructors had pushed her harder, watched her closer, waited for her to quit and ring the bell that would end her suffering. She never rang it. The memory of her hand hovering over that brass bell during hour 97, hypothermia setting in, hallucinations dancing at the edges of her vision, every muscle screaming, still visited her dreams. But she'd pulled her hand back, kept moving, kept fighting. That moment defined her. Not the 47 confirmed kills across 3 deployments, not the 2 Bronze Stars, not the Presidential Unit citation. The moment she chose not to quit was when she became a SEAL. Colonel Marcus Thornton emerged from the operations center, his presence commanding immediate attention. He was old-school military, Vietnam veteran, silver hair cropped close, eyes that had seen too much death to be impressed by posturing. "Gentlemen," his voice cut through the assembled operators like a blade. "This is Lieutenant Commander Sarah Chen, call sign Viper. She's our sniper specialist for Operation Viper Strike." Sarah snapped a crisp salute, "Sir, reporting as ordered." Thornton returned it, then gestured toward the operations tent. "We've got 72 hours before our window closes. High-value target, Khalid al-Rahman, Tier 1 terrorist commander. Intel suggests he's planning a major attack on coalition forces. Multiple American lives at stake." The atmosphere shifted, jokes died. This was the reality they all shared, the mission always came first. Thornton continued, his gaze sweeping the assembly. "Al-Rahman is holed up in a mountain compound, 12 clicks northeast. Heavily fortified, elevated position, multiple sentries. This requires precision. One mistake and he disappears into the tribal areas for another 6 months while Americans die." He turned to Sarah. "Your file says you hold the base record for long-range accuracy. 800 meters, 5-round group sub-MOA. That correct? Yes, sir. Though I've made successful shots at 1,100 in combat conditions. Reynolds snorted audibly. File says a lot of things. Thornton's eyes locked onto the staff sergeant like a missile acquiring target. You have something to contribute, Reynolds. A tense pause. Reynolds knew better than to directly challenge a full-bird colonel, but his body language screamed defiance. Just hopping she can keep up, sir. Mountain insertion, full kit, altitude, it's demanding. Sarah finally spoke, her voice calm, measured, carrying the quiet confidence of someone who had nothing to prove because she'd already proven everything. Staff Sergeant, I've carried wounded operators off mountains in the Hindu Kush. I've made kill shots at altitude with 40-knot crosswinds. I didn't survive Bud S by luck, and I didn't earn this trident. She tapped the seal insignia on her chest by asking for special treatment. She stepped closer, close enough that Reynolds had to look slightly down to meet her eyes. So here's what's going to happen. You're going to do your job, I'm going to do mine. And when this mission is complete and Khalid Al-Rahman is dead, you're going to realize that the only thing that matters in combat is competence. Not gender, not your personal feelings, competence. The silence that followed was absolute. Reynolds' jaw worked, a dozen responses clearly fighting for dominance behind his clenched teeth. But he was smart enough, or professional enough, to simply nod once. Colonel Thornton allowed himself the ghost of a smile. Outstanding. Mission brief in 30 minutes. Chen, get settled. Reynolds, get your squad ready. We roll at 2100 hours. As the assembly dispersed, Sarah hefted her gear and headed toward the barracks. Behind her, she heard Reynolds mutter to his squad, "Hope she can shoot better than she talks shit." Chief Petty Officer Marcus "Doc" Williams, the team's senior medic, fell into step beside her. He was a veteran of 8 deployments, a quiet professional who'd seen every flavor of combat operator the military produced. "Don't mind Reynolds," Doc said quietly. "He's old guard, thinks women in combat units is social engineering." Sarah didn't break stride. "I know his type, met 100 just like him." "Yeah," Doc grinned. "How many of them are still talking shit after you've completed a mission?" For the first time since landing, Sarah allowed herself a small smile. "Not many, Doc, not many at all." They reached the barracks, a prefab structure that offered minimal protection from the elements but beat sleeping in the open. Sarah claimed a bunk, began the familiar ritual of unpacking and organizing gear. Every item had its place, every weapon checked and rechecked. Her spotter, Petty Officer First Class Louis Spector Ortega, appeared in the doorway. Young, sharp-eyed, he'd worked with Sarah on her last deployment. He understood her methods, trusted her instincts. "Heard you already made friends with the jarheads," Spector said, grinning. "Making friends isn't in my job description." "What is?" Sarah pulled her SR-25 rifle from its case, began a meticulous function check. Making impossible shots, eliminating high-value targets, completing the mission. She slid the bolt home with a satisfying click, and proving every single doubter wrong. Outside, the Afghan sun began its descent toward the horizon, painting the desert in shades of amber and blood. Somewhere in those mountains, Khalid Al-Rahman was planning death. Planning to kill Americans, coalition forces, innocent civilians. Sarah methodically cleaned her rifle, muscle memory taking over while her mind worked through calculations. Distance, windage, elevation, temperature, every variable that could mean the difference between mission success and catastrophic failure. In 72 hours, she'd prove exactly what a Navy SEAL could do. Gender had nothing to do with it. The smirks would stop soon enough. Dawn arrived like a hammer strike, sudden, brutal, unforgiving. Sarah was already awake, had been for an hour, running through her pre-mission routine with mechanical precision. 500 meters of sprint intervals around the base perimeter, weapon function checks, mental rehearsal of every scenario that could unfold in the mountains. By 600, she stood at the long-range qualification course, SR-25 rifle assembled and ready. The morning air still held a hint of coolness, though that would burn off within the hour. Reynolds and his Marine squad had gathered to watch, their presence clearly intended to intimidate. It had the opposite effect. Sarah thrived under scrutiny. Master Chief Hendricks, the range safety officer and a crusty veteran of 30 years, approached with a clipboard and a skeptical expression that suggested he'd seen 1,000 hotshot operators fail to live up to their reputations. Lieutenant Commander Chen, he drawled, Texas accent thick as motor oil. Standard qual course. 5 rounds, 800 meters standing unsupported. Acceptable group is 8 inches. You ready? Ready, Master Chief. Reynolds leaned against a Humvee, arms crossed, stopwatch visible in his hand. Several other operators had materialized, drawn by the promise of either vindication or humiliation. Sarah recognized the dynamic every woman in special operations faced it. The constant testing, the perpetual need to prove worthiness. She'd long ago stopped resenting it. Now she simply used it as fuel. Sarah settled into her shooting position, feet shoulder-width apart, rifle mounted firmly, breathing controlled. Through the scope, the target wavered in the heat mirage already beginning to rise from the desert floor. 800 meters, nearly half a mile. Most infantry couldn't hit a barn at this distance. She made her wind call, adjusted for temperature and barometric pressure, then settled the reticle on center mass. First shot. The rifle bucked against her shoulder, the suppressor reducing the report to a manageable crack. Through the scope, she watched the impact, dead center. She cycled the bolt with practiced efficiency, brass ejecting in a golden arc. Second shot, third, fourth, fifth. The entire sequence took 43 seconds. Master Chief Hendricks walked downrange with binoculars, examined the target, then keyed his radio. All 5 rounds through a 2.3-inch group. Center mass, that's a new base record. Reynolds' stopwatch clattered to the ground. Doc Williams, who'd been observing from the side, let out a low whistle. Damn Viper, that's surgeon-level precision. Sarah cleared her weapon, safetied it, then turned to face the assembled operators. Her expression remained neutral, professional. Just doing my job, Master Chief. Reynolds recovered his stopwatch, jaw tight. Lucky wind conditions. Then you're welcome to try, Staff Sergeant, Sarah replied evenly. I'll spot for you. The challenge hung in the air like cordite smoke. Several Marines shifted uncomfortably. Everyone knew Reynolds was a solid marksman, but solid didn't match what they'd just witnessed. Reynolds had the good sense not to take the bait. I'm infantry, not a sniper. Different skill set. Exactly, Sarah said, her tone making it clear the conversation was over. The morning progressed into tactical drills. The team ran close-quarters battle scenarios, room clearing, immediate action drills. Sarah moved through each exercise with fluid efficiency, her smaller frame actually advantageous in tight spaces. She cleared corners faster, presented a smaller target, and her shots remained accurate even during high-stress simulations. By noon, when the temperature hit 115 degrees, they transitioned to the mountain simulation course, a brutal 3-mile circuit through rocky terrain with full combat loads. 80 pounds of gear, weapons, ammunition, water. The course was designed to break bodies and spirits. Lieutenant Hayes, the SEAL team leader, set the pace. 38 minutes is the standard. Under 35 earns respect. Let's move. Sarah positioned herself in the middle of the formation, knowing that Reynolds would be watching for any sign of weakness. The first mile was deceptively manageable, rolling hills, packed dirt. Then the terrain turned vicious. Loose shale threatened to twist ankles, steep inclines burned through leg muscles, and the altitude made every breath feel insufficient. Reynolds positioned himself directly behind her, his presence clearly intended to pressure her into mistakes. She could hear his controlled breathing, feel his eyes boring into her back. She ignored him completely. At mile 2, several of the Marines were laboring, their breathing ragged. Sarah's own lungs screamed for more oxygen, her shoulders ached from the pack straps cutting into them, and her legs felt like they were filled with concrete. But pain was just information. You acknowledged it and kept moving. She'd learned that lesson during Hell Week, when hypothermia had turned her body into a shivering, unresponsive prison. The instructors had screamed at her, told her she was too small, too weak, that she'd never make it. They'd pointed at the bell, that brass salvation that would end the suffering with a single ring. Instead, she put one frozen foot in front of the other, again and again, for hours that blurred into days. This 3-mile course was nothing compared to that crucible. At the final ascent, a near-vertical climb requiring hands and feet, Sarah attacked it with renewed energy. She'd paced herself perfectly, conserved her strength for this moment. Below, she could hear Reynolds struggling, his heavier frame working against him on the technical terrain. She crested the summit with lungs burning and vision tunneling, but she didn't slow. The descent was treacherous, requiring careful foot placement to avoid a catastrophic fall. She navigated it with mountain goat precision, training from Colorado's high-altitude courses paying dividends. The finish line appeared through the heat shimmer. Lieutenant Hayes was already there, checking his watch. Sarah crossed at 32 minutes, 18 seconds. Hayes nodded approval. Outstanding time, Viper. She dropped her pack, hands on knees, gulping air. Thank you, sir. Reynolds arrived 90 seconds later, his face flushed crimson, sweat-soaked. He collapsed beside his gear, chest heaving. For a long moment he said nothing, just stared at Sarah with an expression caught between frustration and grudging acknowledgement. Doc Williams, who'd finished at 34 minutes, passed water bottles around. Viper, you train in altitude specifically. Colorado, Pikes Peak region, 16 weeks before deployment. Sarah drained half the bottle, then poured the rest over her head. Elevation here is only 5,800 feet. Pikes Peak base is over 6,000, summit training at 14,000. That's hardcore preparation, Doc observed. That's the job, Sarah replied simply. As the afternoon wore into evening, the team gathered in the operations center for detailed mission planning. Satellite imagery covered every wall, high-resolution photos of Khalid al-Rahman's compound from multiple angles. Sarah studied them with obsessive focus, her analytical mind cataloging every detail. The compound sat on a ridgeline, surrounded by steep approaches, guard towers at each corner, a central courtyard visible in the overhead shots, thick walls that would stop anything short of anti-tank weapons. Overwatch position here, she pointed to a rocky outcrop 1,200 meters northeast. Elevation advantage, clear sight lines to the compound, multiple escape routes if we're compromised. Lieutenant Hayes traced the approach route. 12-click insertion, hike in under darkness, establish position before dawn. Rules of engagement are weapons-free on confirmed hostiles, but his expression darkened. Intel suggests civilian presence, possible human shields. The room went quiet. Human shields complicated everything. One errant round could kill an innocent, torpedo the mission, create an international incident. I'll need positive identification before any shot, Sarah stated. Clear separation between target and non-combatants, no exceptions. Colonel Thornton entered, his presence commanding immediate attention. Updated intel just came through. Al-Rahman is definitely in the compound. We've intercepted communications planning an attack on the coalition airbase at Bagram. Timeline is tight. We believe the attack is scheduled within 72 hours. He looked directly at Sarah. Your mission is to eliminate Al-Rahman and disrupt the terrorist cell's command structure. This is a kill mission, not capture. He's too dangerous, and extraction would be impossible from that location. Sarah met his gaze steadily. Understood, sir. When do we insert? 2100 hours. You've got. Thornton checked his watch. 6 hours to finalize prep. The briefing concluded, and the operators dispersed to their final preparations. Sarah returned to the armory, where she began the meticulous process of preparing her rifle for the mission ahead. Each component was inspected, cleaned, and verified. She mounted her Leopold scope, bore-sighted it, then confirmed 0 at the range. Her ammunition was match grade, each round hand-selected for consistency. She packed her drag bag with spare magazines, range cards, weather meters, and the 1,000 small items that could mean the difference between mission success and failure. Spectre joined her, bringing his own spotting scope and data books. Target package looks complicated. They always are, Sarah replied, running a patch through her barrel. That's why they call us. Reynolds has been quiet since the course. Good. Maybe he's finally figuring out that talking wastes energy better spent on the mission. Spectre grinned. Or maybe he's just scared you'll outshoot him again. I'm not competing with Reynolds, Sarah said, her tone serious. I'm competing with the best version of myself. Reynolds and his opinions are irrelevant. Outside, the sun dipped toward the horizon, painting the sky in violent shades of orange and purple. In 6 hours, they'd board helicopters and fly into hostile territory. In 12 hours, Sarah would be lying in a hide site, scope focused on a compound full of terrorists. And somewhere in that compound, Khalid al-Rahman, a man responsible for the deaths of dozens of coalition soldiers, would step into her crosshairs. She trained her entire career for moments like this. The smirks didn't matter, the doubt didn't matter. The only thing that mattered was the mission. And she never missed. The Black Hawk's turbines screamed through the darkness, their mechanical roar swallowing all conversation. Sarah sat with her back against the helicopter's vibrating hull, rifle case between her knees, eyes closed in meditation. Around her, 12 operators prepared themselves in their own ways. Some checked weapons for the 100th time, others stared into nothing, minds already in combat mode. Reynolds sat across from her, his face painted in camouflage, night vision goggles pushed up on his helmet. She could feel his gaze even through closed eyelids, that constant assessment, waiting for her to show fear or weakness. She'd stopped caring what he thought somewhere over the Pakistan border. The crew chief's voice crackled through her headset. 5 minutes to insertion point. Ground temperature 48 degrees, wind from the northeast at 12 knots. No enemy activity detected on approach. Sarah's eyes opened. Time to work. The helicopter banked hard, dropping altitude rapidly to avoid radar detection. Her stomach lurched, but her hands remained steady as she performed final equipment checks. Night vision operational, radio, encrypted channel clear, rifle condition 1 round chambered, safety on, knife secured, medical kit accessible. Lieutenant Hayes made eye contact with each team member, getting nods of readiness. When he reached Sarah, she gave him a thumbs up. He returned it, then signaled the crew chief. 30 seconds. The Black Hawk flared, rotors beating the mountain air into submission as it descended toward the landing zone. Before the skids fully touched down, Sarah was moving, first out the door, weapon up, scanning her sector for threats. The night exploded with rotor wash and dust. She moved 20 meters from the bird, took a knee, and established security while the rest of the team disembarked. The cold mountain air bit through her uniform, a sharp contrast to the base's desert heat. Behind her, the Black Hawk lifted off immediately, disappearing into the darkness within seconds. The sudden silence was profound, broken only by wind whistling through rocky crags and the occasional click of equipment as operators adjusted their loads. Lieutenant Hayes' hand signals were clear in the green glow of night vision. Tactical column, northwest bearing, Sarah in the middle of the formation. They moved out immediately, wasting no motion or time. The terrain was Afghanistan's particular brand of hostile, a landscape seemingly designed to break humans. Loose shale that shifted underfoot, hidden ravines that could swallow the unwary, elevation that sucked oxygen from desperate lungs. They were at 7,200 feet and climbing, the air thin enough to make every breath feel insufficient. Sarah carried 83 pounds of gear: rifle, ammunition, water, equipment, body armor. The pack straps cut into her shoulders, creating pressure points that would evolve into bruises by mission's end. Her legs burned with lactic acid buildup as they climbed a particularly steep section. Behind her, Reynolds breathed hard, his heavier frame working against him in the altitude. She could hear the slight wheeze in his exhalations, the telltale sign of someone pushing their cardiovascular system to its limits. She maintained her pace, steady, sustainable, relentless, one foot in front of the other. The mantra that had carried her through Hell Week now carried her up this mountain. 2 hours into the 12-kilometer patrol, Doc Williams signaled a security halt. The team took knee, forming a defensive perimeter while catching their breath. Sarah pulled her hydration tube to her lips, took measured sips. Dehydration at altitude was as deadly as any bullet. Reynolds edged closer, his voice a harsh whisper barely audible over the wind. Impressive pace for someone your size. Sarah didn't look at him, her eyes scanning the darkness through night vision. Size is irrelevant, Staff Sergeant. Heart and lungs are what matter up here. Yeah, well, Reynolds paused, seemed to struggle with the words. You know, if you can't hack it, there's no shame in calling for extract. Better to admit limitations than compromise the mission. Sarah finally turned to face him, her expression unreadable behind camouflage paint and night vision. I appreciate your concern for the mission, Staff Sergeant, but I trained for this insertion in Colorado mountains at 14,000 feet carrying a 100-pound pack. This, she gestured at the terrain around them, this is a warm-up. For a long moment Reynolds said nothing, then barely audible, your call. But something had shifted in his tone. Not quite respect, but perhaps the first crack in his armor of dismissal. Lieutenant Hayes signaled movement. The team rose as one, resumed the patrol. The terrain grew more treacherous, a knife-edge ridge with vertical drops on both sides, requiring careful foot placement and absolute focus. One misstep would mean a tumbling fall hundreds of feet into darkness. Sarah navigated it with mountain warfare training guiding each step. She'd done this exact scenario dozens of times at Fort Carson, sometimes in blizzard conditions with visibility measured in feet. She'd learned to trust her feet, to read terrain through touch and balance rather than sight alone. The operator ahead of her, a SEAL named Jackson, suddenly froze. His fist went up, enemy contact signal. The entire team became statues, weapons oriented outward, fingers on triggers. Through her night vision, Sarah detected movement 300 meters downslope. A shepherd with a small flock of goats, moving along a trail completely unaware of the armed force above him. Hayes' decision was instant. Let him pass. Engaging a civilian would compromise the mission and violate rules of engagement. The team waited, invisible in the darkness, while the shepherd and his animals wandered by, the tinkling of goat bells incongruously peaceful in the lethal environment. After 20 minutes, the shepherd disappeared around a bend. The team resumed movement, but the encounter had reminded everyone that they were deep in hostile territory, surrounded by potential threats both military and civilian. At hour 4, they reached a steep ravine requiring a technical descent. Spectre, Sarah's spotter, went first, testing handholds and establishing an anchor point. Sarah followed, her smaller frame actually advantageous in the tight confines, allowing her to wedge into cracks and chimneys that larger operators had to bypass. Reynolds came last, struggling with the angle and his bulk. Halfway down, his foot slipped on loose rock. He slid several feet before catching himself, dislodging a cascade of stones that clattered into the ravine below, noise that carried for miles in the mountain silence. Everyone froze. That kind of sound could alert enemy sentries, compromise their approach, get them all killed. Hayes' voice was ice cold in the radio. "Freeze. Listen." They waited in absolute stillness for 5 minutes, monitoring for any reaction to the noise. Sarah's finger rested beside her trigger guard, ready to engage if hostile forces appeared. Her heart rate remained steady, combat breathing, the technique drilled into her through thousands of hours of training. No reaction. The mountains remained silent except for wind. Hayes signaled movement. They continued the descent more carefully, Reynolds now hyper-focused on every hand and foothold. At the bottom of the ravine, they took another brief halt. Sarah checked her GPS. They were on schedule, 6 kilometers covered, 6 remaining. The hard part was still ahead. Doc Williams moved beside her, offered an energy gel. "How you holding up, Viper?" "Good to go, Doc. You?" "These mountains are kicking my ass," he admitted with a grin. "But then, I'm old. You kids should be bouncing up these hills." "I don't bounce anywhere with 80 pounds on my back." "Could have fooled me. You're moving like you've got wings." Sarah smiled beneath her face paint. Doc was good people, a professional who judged operators by their performance, not their chromosomes. She'd take a dozen Doc Williams over 100 Jake Reynolds any day. The patrol continued through the darkness. Hour 5 brought them to a boulder field that required careful navigation, massive stones the size of houses, gaps between them that could break ankles or worse. They picked their way through like ghosts, weapons ready, eyes scanning constantly. Hour 6, a near-vertical ascent up a cliff face that required using climbing gear. Sarah clipped into the rope, began the climb with practiced efficiency. Her arms burned, fingers aching from gripping stone, but she'd done countless rope climbs during Bud's training. This was just another iteration of that endless test. She crested the cliff, took security, then helped establish the anchor point for subsequent climbers. One by one, the team ascended. Even Reynolds made it without complaint, though Sarah could see the exhaustion in his movements. At hour 7, with dawn threatening the eastern horizon, they reached their objective, a rocky outcropping that overlooked Khalid al-Rahman's compound 1,200 meters distant. The position was exactly as satellite imagery had shown. Excellent fields of fire, natural defilade for protection, multiple escape routes. Sarah and Spectre immediately began setting up their hide site. Camouflage netting went up first, breaking their outline against the rocky background. Then Sarah unpacked her rifle, assembled the weapon with reverent care, and settled into a prone shooting position. Through her scope, she got her first real look at the target. Her blood ran cold. The compound was more heavily fortified than intelligence had suggested. Guard towers at all 4 corners, each manned by sentries with heavy weapons. The walls were reinforced concrete, not mud brick. Patrol patterns were disciplined, professional. These weren't amateur jihadists but trained fighters. Worse, movement in the courtyard revealed women and children. Civilians, either family members or human shields. Killing al-Rahman just became exponentially more complicated. Spectre, peering through his spotting scope, let out a low whistle. This is going to be a tough nut to crack. Sarah's jaw tightened. Tough is what they pay us for. She began the methodical process of range estimation, wind calculation, and target analysis that would occupy the next 18 hours. Somewhere in that fortress, a terrorist leader planned mass murder. And Sarah Chen was going to stop him. The mountains watched in silence as dawn broke over Afghanistan, painting the killing ground in shades of gold and shadow. The real mission was about to begin. The sun climbed mercilessly across the Afghan sky, turning their rocky hide site into an oven. Sarah remained motionless behind her rifle, eye pressed to the scope, watching the compound with unblinking focus. Beside her, Spectre maintained his own vigil through the spotting scope, logging every detail in their data book. "Guard rotation every 30 minutes, clockwork precision," Spectre whispered. "Northeast tower, 2 sentries, 1 RPG, 1 PKM machine gun. Northwest tower, same loadout. These guys are disciplined." Sarah tracked a sentry's movement across the compound wall. Former military, Taliban special forces, maybe ex-Pakistani ISI. Look at their spacing, weapon handling. These aren't village fighters. The heat shimmered off the distant compound, creating mirage effects that would complicate any long-range shot. Sarah made notes on her range card: temperature rising, air density decreasing, bullet trajectory would be affected. Every variable mattered at 1,200 meters. Behind them, the rest of the team had established a defensive perimeter. Lieutenant Hayes coordinated with base command through encrypted satellite communications. Doc Williams treated a minor ankle sprain one operator had sustained during the climb. Reynolds and his Marines watched the approaches, weapons ready. Hour 3 of observation brought movement in the compound courtyard. Sarah's finger tensed on the rifle stock as a group of men emerged from the central building. Through the Leopold scope's magnification, she could make out faces, postures, weapons. Spectre center courtyard, 6 males, military age. Center figure matches Al Rahman's profile. Spectre adjusted his scope, confirming. Height approximately 510, beard, wearing tan shalwar camis. Could be our HVT, but I need better facial recognition. The figure turned, and for a brief moment, Sarah had a clear profile shot. She compared it mentally to the photographs memorized during mission briefing. Hooked nose, distinctive scar above left eyebrow, heavy brow ridge. "That's him," she breathed. "That's Khalid Al Rahman." Her finger moved to the trigger. The crosshairs settled on his chest. Range, 1,247 meters. Wind, 8 knots from the northeast. Temperature, 94 degrees and climbing. She could take the shot right now, end this mission before it truly began. Then a woman appeared, carrying a small child. She walked directly between Sarah's rifle and the target. 2 more children followed, playing in the courtyard, laughing with the innocence of those who don't understand they're surrounded by death. Sarah's finger moved away from the trigger. Negative shot, civilians in the kill zone. Lieutenant Hayes' voice crackled in her earpiece. "Confirmed, Viper, hold fire. We need a clean shot, no collateral damage." Al Rahman spoke with his lieutenants for several minutes, then retreated back inside the compound. The opportunity vanished. "Patience," Spectre murmured. "He'll show again." The waiting was its own special torture. Sarah had learned this lesson in sniper school. The physical discomfort of remaining motionless for hours. The mental discipline required to stay alert when nothing was happening. The psychological pressure of knowing that one moment of inattention could mean mission failure. Her body screamed complaints. The rocky ground pressed into her hip bones. Her shoulders ached from maintaining the rifle position. Dehydration made her lips crack despite careful water consumption. But she didn't move, didn't shift position, didn't compromise her shooting platform. This was what separated snipers from other operators. The ability to become part of the landscape, to outlast discomfort, to wait with inhuman patience for the perfect moment. Hour 6 brought radio traffic that changed everything. "All Viper elements, this is Atlas Base." Colonel Thornton's voice carried unusual urgency. "We've intercepted enemy communications. The timeline has accelerated. Al Rahman's attack is now scheduled for 12 hours from now, not 72. Repeat, mission timeline is critically compressed." Hayes cursed under his breath. "Atlas Base, confirm, attack in 12 hours. "Affirmative. Multiple suicide bombers, vehicle-borne IEDs, coordinated assault on Bagram Air Base. Estimated casualties in the hundreds if we don't neutralize this cell." Sarah's jaw tightened. Hundreds of lives. American service members, coalition partners, Afghan civilians working on base, all depending on her ability to put a bullet through one man's skull from nearly 3/4 of a mile away. "Viper, do you have a shot?" Hayes asked. "Negative. Target is inside the compound. Civilians still present in courtyard." "Then we wait, but not much longer. If we don't get a clean opportunity, we'll have to assault the compound directly." A direct assault would be a bloodbath. The fortifications, the elevated positions, the interlocking fields of fire, it would cost lives, probably more than they'd save. Sarah understood the unspoken pressure. Find a sniper solution, or men would die taking this compound by force. Hour 9 brought unexpected movement. 3 technical trucks roared up the mountain road toward the compound, Toyota Hiluxes with heavy machine guns mounted in their beds. Reinforcements. Through her scope, Sarah counted approximately 15 additional fighters disembarking. They carried AK-47s, RPGs, belt-fed machine guns. The compound was transforming into a fortress. "This is getting worse by the minute," Spectre observed. "We're now looking at 40+ hostiles, heavy weapons, prepared positions." Reynolds, monitoring from the perimeter, crawled forward to Sarah's position. For once, his voice carried no mockery, only tactical concern. "Viper, even if you drop Al Rahman, his lieutenants will continue the mission. We need to neutralize the leadership element, not just the top guy." Sarah had already reached the same conclusion. "Agreed. I'll need multiple targets, sequential shots, before they can react and take cover." "Can you do that? Multiple precision shots at this range in rapid succession?" She turned to look at him, her eyes hard as the rocks surrounding them. "Staff Sergeant, I've made 23 consecutive hits at 1,000 meters during qualification. The question isn't whether I can do it. The question is whether the tactical situation will allow clean shots without civilian casualties." Reynolds studied her for a long moment, and something fundamental shifted in his expression. This wasn't the dismissive smirk of their first meeting. This was a combat veteran recognizing competence in another operator. "What do you need from us?" he asked simply. "Security. If I'm taking multiple shots, they'll locate our position through sound triangulation. We'll have approximately 90 seconds before they start dropping mortars on this ridgeline. The team needs to be ready to displace immediately after I shoot." Reynolds nodded. "I'll coordinate with Hayes. Extraction route, covering fire, everything ready to execute on your shot." He crawled back to relay the plan. Spectre watched him go, then grinned at Sarah. "I think he's finally figured out you're not going anywhere." "Took him long enough." Hour 12 brought dusk and dropping temperatures. The compound lights flickered on, generators providing power. Through thermal imaging, Sarah could track heat signatures moving inside buildings. Al Rahman was in the central structure, surrounded by his command element. The women and children had retired to a separate building on the compound's western edge. That was good. Separation between combatants and non-combatants improved the tactical picture significantly. "We might get our window after dark," Sarah said. "Thermal signatures, no visual on civilians, targets separated by heat bloom." But then the situation deteriorated catastrophically. Gunfire erupted in the valley below. The distinctive chatter of AK-47s mixed with heavier PKM machine guns. Tracer rounds arced through the gathering darkness like deadly fireflies. "Contact," Hayes hissed into the radio. "Afghan militia forces engaging the compound. We have a developing situation." Through her scope, Sarah watched chaos unfold. An Afghan militia, perhaps 30 fighters in civilian clothes armed with a mix of weapons, had launched an assault on the compound from the southern approach. They were brave but poorly coordinated, running into prepared defensive positions. The compound defenders returned fire with devastating effect. The militia fighters were caught in the open, pinned down, taking casualties. Blood and screaming filled the mountain air. Then something happened that made Sarah's blood run cold. 3 bound prisoners, 2 men and a woman, were dragged into the courtyard by terrorists. An executioner stood behind them, pistol raised to the back of the first prisoner's head. A loudspeaker crackled to life, broadcasting demands in Pashto that the militia withdraw or watch the hostages die. "Command, this is Viper," Hayes transmitted urgently. "We have a hostage situation developing. 3 civilians about to be executed. Request authorization to engage." Colonel Thornton's response came immediately. "You are authorized to provide support. Save those civilians. Viper, you have weapons free. Take the shot." Sarah's world contracted to the scope. The executioner stood in her crosshairs, 1,247 meters distant. The wind had shifted, now 10 knots from the east. Temperature had dropped to 78 degrees. Mirage effects were lessening with the fading light. But this was still an incredibly difficult shot. Moving target, low light conditions, extreme range, high-pressure situation. Reynolds' voice cut through her concentration. "Viper, can you make this shot?" Sarah's breathing slowed, her heart rate dropping into the controlled rhythm she'd trained for years to achieve. The rifle became an extension of her body, the bullet's trajectory as familiar as her own heartbeat. "Yeah," she said quietly, "I can make it." Her finger took up slack on the trigger. The executioner pressed his pistol against the prisoner's skull. The margin for error was 0, miss, and an innocent person dies. Wound instead of kill, and the executioner still pulls his trigger. One shot, one chance, one moment to prove that every hour of training, every sacrifice, every time she pushed past pain and doubt had been worth it. Sarah exhaled slowly, let her body settle into absolute stillness, and squeezed the trigger. The rifle's suppressed report was a muted crack against the mountain silence. Through the scope, Sarah watched the bullet's flight seem to stretch across impossible distance. 247 meters of mountain air, wind, and gravity trying to pull her round off course. The executioner's head snapped backward violently, the pistol falling from lifeless fingers. He crumpled like a puppet with cut strings, dead before his body hit the courtyard stones. The 3 prisoners scattered, survival instinct overriding their bound hands. "Target down," Spectre confirmed. "Clean kill, hostages mobile." But Sarah was already cycling the bolt, brass ejecting in a golden arc, acquiring her next target. The compound had erupted into pandemonium, defenders scrambling to locate the source of the shot, militia fighters rallying for another push, civilians screaming and running for cover. A sentry on the northeast tower swung his PKM machine gun toward the militia position below. Sarah's crosshairs found him, steady despite her elevated heart rate. She led the target slightly, compensating for his movement. Shot. The sentry folded over his weapon, the machine gun going silent. 2 rounds, 2 kills. But now the real challenge began. "Viper, you're exposed," Hayes transmitted urgently. "They'll triangulate your position from muzzle flash and sound. You've got maybe 60 seconds before they start dropping mortars on this ridge." Sarah ignored him. Her world had contracted to the 12-power magnification of her scope, to breathing and trigger control, to the ancient dance between hunter and hunted that predated civilization itself. A heavy weapons operator on the western wall was traversing a DSHK heavy machine gun toward the pinned militia fighters. That .50 caliber weapon would tear through their cover like paper, slaughter them in seconds. Sarah found him in her reticle, range unchanged, wind shifting, now 12 knots quartering from the northeast. She adjusted her hold, compensating with practiced precision. Shot. The operator's head erupted in a pink mist visible even at this distance. The DSHK fell silent, its barrel pointing skyward uselessly. 3 for 3, Spectre breathed, his voice carrying equal parts awe and professional appreciation. "Viper, you're shooting lights out." But the compound defenders weren't stupid. A spotter in the southern tower had located their hide site. Sarah saw him pointing directly at their position, screaming orders into a radio. Mortar rounds would be incoming within seconds. "Hayes, we need to displace now," Sarah said calmly, already calculating her next shots. "But I've got more work to do first." "Viper, we don't have time." 60 seconds. Give me 60 seconds. She swung the rifle toward the southern tower where the spotter was coordinating the defensive response. He was partially concealed behind sandbags, only his head and shoulders visible. Difficult shot, small target, 1,250 meters now that he'd moved to a different position. Sarah's finger found the trigger. Exhale, settle, press. Shot. The spotter disappeared behind the sandbags. Spectre confirmed, hit, target neutralized. 5 rounds fired, 5 enemies dead, but the situation was deteriorating rapidly. The militia fighters, seeing the compound's defenses crumbling under Sarah's precision fire, launched another assault. They charged forward with more courage than tactical sense, AK-47s blazing, RPGs streaking toward the compound walls. One RPG struck the main gate, blowing it off its hinges in a shower of splinters and smoke. Militia fighters poured through the breach, and suddenly the battle devolved into close-quarters chaos. Sarah tracked movement through her scope, searching for high-value targets. There, a commander directing defenders from a second-story window. She recognized him from intelligence photos. Hamid Ghazi, Al-Rahman's second-in-command, responsible for at least 3 suicide bombings. Shot. Ghazi stumbled backward into the building's interior, clutching his chest. One less terrorist planning American deaths. "Viper, mortar teams are setting up," Reynolds shouted from his position. "I can see them through thermals. They're about to light us up." Sarah swept her scope across the compound, searching desperately for Khalid Al-Rahman himself. All this shooting meant nothing if the primary target escaped. She needed him in her crosshairs, needed confirmation that this mission succeeded. There, second-floor window of the central building. A figure moving with authority, surrounded by bodyguards. The distinctive profile, the height, the bearing of a commander used to giving orders. Al-Rahman. He was moving toward an interior doorway, probably heading for a bunker or escape tunnel. Once he disappeared into the building's depths, he'd be gone, vanished into the Pakistani tribal areas where even drones couldn't find him. Sarah had maybe 3 seconds of opportunity. The angle was terrible, shooting through an open window at a moving target, with bodyguards partially obscuring her view. Wind had increased to 15 knots, gusting unpredictably. The compound was full of smoke from the RPG strike, creating additional visual interference. This was the shot that mattered. Miss, and Al-Rahman lives to plan more attacks, kill more Americans, spread more terror. Miss, and this entire mission fails despite her 6 confirmed kills. She could feel Reynolds watching her, feel the entire team holding their breath, feel the weight of hundreds of lives at Bagram Air Base depending on what happened in the next 3 seconds. Al-Rahman took another step toward the doorway, 2 seconds of visibility remaining. Sarah's training took over, muscle memory refined through 10,000 practice shots, mental calculations processed faster than conscious thought. She compensated for wind, for the angle, for Al-Rahman's movement, for every variable that separated success from failure. Her world became absolutely silent. No gunfire, no shouting, no explosions. Just her heartbeat, slow and steady. Just her breathing, controlled and even. Just the crosshairs settling on a point in space where Al-Rahman would be in 1.2 seconds when her bullet arrived. She pressed the trigger with the same gentle pressure she'd used to handle a raw egg. The rifle bucked. The suppressor masked most of the muzzle flash, but not all. Through the scope, she watched the bullet's impact. Al-Rahman jerked violently, his body twisting as the round struck center mass. He collapsed, disappearing from view. "Target down," Spectre called. "HVT is down. I saw the hit center chest. He's not getting up from that." But there was no time for celebration. Reynolds was screaming, "Mortars incoming! Move, move, move!" Sarah grabbed her rifle, rolled away from the hide site just as the first mortar round impacted exactly where she'd been lying 10 seconds earlier. The explosion was deafening, shrapnel whining through the air like angry hornets. More mortars rained down, walking across the ridgeline in a pattern designed to saturate their position. The team scattered, each operator following their rehearsed escape routes, bounding between cover as high-explosive death searched for them. Sarah ran in a crouch, rifle clutched across her chest, Spectre right behind her. A mortar round impacted 15 meters to her left, the overpressure wave slamming into her like a physical punch. She stumbled but kept moving, kept running, survival instinct overriding the ringing in her ears. "Rally Point Alpha," Hayes transmitted. "All elements break contact and move to Rally Point Alpha." They'd planned for this. A covered position 200 meters northeast where the terrain provided defilade from mortar fire. Sarah sprinted for it, legs burning, lungs screaming for air in the thin mountain atmosphere. Behind her, the compound was in full chaos. The militia fighters had breached the inner walls, engaging in room-to-room fighting with the surviving defenders. Gunfire echoed across the valley like thunder, tracers creating a deadly light show against the darkening sky. Sarah reached the rally point, dove behind a boulder, and immediately brought her rifle up to cover their back trail. One by one, the team members appeared. Hayes, Doc Williams, Reynolds, and his Marines, finally Spectre sliding in beside her. "Head count," Hayes ordered. Each operator sounded off. Everyone accounted for, no casualties. A minor miracle given the volume of fire they just escaped. Reynolds was on the radio with command. "Atlas Base, this is Viper 6. HVT is confirmed down. Compound is under assault by local militia. We are displaced from primary position and standing by for further orders." Colonel Thornton's voice came back. "Outstanding work, Viper 6. QRF helicopters are inbound, ETA 20 minutes. Sit tight and prepare for extraction." Sarah collapsed against the boulder, adrenaline beginning to fade and leave exhaustion in its wake. Her hands trembled slightly, not from fear, but from the biochemical aftermath of sustained combat stress. Spectre handed her a water bottle. 7 shots, 7 kills, including the HVT. "Viper, that was the best shooting I've ever seen." She drained half the bottle, then allowed herself a small smile. "That's what they pay us for." Reynolds crawled over, his face smudged with dirt and cordite residue. For a long moment he just looked at her, and this time there was no smirk, no condescension, no doubt. "You just saved about 40 militia fighters down there," he said quietly. "Took out their heavy weapons, eliminated their command structure, gave those guys a fighting chance. And you killed the bastard who's been planning to murder hundreds of Americans." Sarah met his eyes. "Just doing my job, Staff Sergeant." "No," Reynolds shook his head firmly. "That wasn't just doing a job, that was. I don't even have words for what that was. Surgical, precise, lethal." He paused. "I was wrong about you, completely, totally wrong." It was the closest thing to an apology Sarah had ever heard from him, and she recognized the sincerity behind it. "Apology accepted," she said simply. Below them, the battle for the compound was winding down. The militia had overwhelmed the defenders, who were either dead, surrendering, or fleeing into the mountains. Quick reaction force helicopters appeared on the horizon, their running lights visible against the evening sky. Sarah watched them approach and allowed herself a moment of satisfaction. The mission was complete. Al-Rahman was dead. The attack on Bagram would never happen. Hundreds of lives saved by 7 precisely placed bullets. This was why she'd endured Bud S. This was why she'd pushed through every doubt, every obstacle, every person who said she couldn't do it. Because when it mattered most, when lives hung in the balance, she delivered. The siege was silenced, and she'd been the one to silence it. The extraction helicopters thundered overhead, their searchlights cutting through the darkness like white-hot spears. But Sarah remained focused on the compound below, where sporadic gunfire still echoed across the valley. The battle wasn't over, not yet. Viper, compound status. Colonel Thornton's voice crackled through her earpiece. Sarah peered through her scope, scanning the chaotic scene. Militia fighters moved through the buildings, clearing rooms with aggressive but undisciplined tactics. Bodies littered the courtyard, some terrorist defenders, some militia casualties. Smoke drifted across her sight picture from burning vehicles. Militia forces have control of the outer compound, she reported. Inner sanctum still contested. Thermal imaging shows approximately 8 to 10 hostiles barricaded in the central building. Can you provide overwatch support? Sarah checked her ammunition. She'd fired 7 rounds. Her magazine held 20. Affirmative. I can provide precision fire if needed. Hayes looked at her with concern. Viper, we've completed the primary mission. Al Rahman is dead. We don't need to. Those militia fighters saved our asses by launching that assault, Sarah interrupted. They're taking casualties down there. If I can help, I'm helping. Reynolds, listening nearby, nodded slowly. She's right, we don't leave allies hanging. Through the scope, Sarah watched a drama unfold. 3 militia fighters were pinned down in the courtyard by fire from a second-story window. A terrorist with an RPK light machine gun had them locked down, rounds chewing through their cover with methodical precision. Sarah acquired the target. Window, 2nd floor, northeast corner. Range, 1,189 meters. Wind had decreased to 8 knots, steady from the east. Temperature dropping rapidly, now 63 degrees as full darkness settled over the mountains. She made her calculations with the speed of long practice. Dial adjustment, up 4.2 mils. Wind hold, 0.8 mils right. The machine gunner was partially concealed behind a wall, only his upper torso and the weapon visible. Small target, difficult angle, but not impossible. Sarah settled into her shooting position, her body finding that perfect alignment where rifle and shooter became one unified system. Her breathing slowed to the point where Spectre, watching beside her, could barely detect movement. On target, she whispered. The machine gunner fired another burst, forcing the militia fighters to keep their heads down. In his focus on them, he'd made himself vulnerable, leaning further out the window to get a better angle. Fatal mistake. Sarah pressed the trigger. The rifle spoke its suppressed language of death. Through the scope, she watched the machine gunner's head snap backward, the RPK falling from the window to clatter on the courtyard stones below. The 3 pinned militia fighters immediately seized the opportunity, rushing forward to breach the central building. That's 8, Spectre logged in their data book. 8 shots, 8 kills. You're running a perfect score, Viper. But Sarah was already searching for the next threat. Movement on the compound's western wall, a terrorist fighter setting up a mortar tube, clearly planning to drop rounds on the militia forces now inside the compound. Range, 1,156 meters, partially obscured by sandbags, moving target as he adjusted the mortar's base plate. She led him slightly, anticipating his movement pattern. When he paused to check the mortar's alignment, she fired. The terrorist crumpled over his weapon. The mortar would never fire. 9 for 9, Spectre confirmed. Viper, you're absolutely surgical tonight. Doc Williams crawled up beside them, medical kit ready. Militia forces are requesting medical support. They've got wounded in the compound. Hayes made the decision quickly. Doc, take Reynolds and 2 Marines. Get down there and provide aid. Viper maintains overwatch. If anything moves that threatens our people, you eliminate it." "Roger that," Sarah acknowledged. She watched through her scope as Doc and Reynolds' team descended toward the compound, their movements cautious but purposeful. The militia fighters initially raised weapons, then recognized coalition forces and lowered them, relief visible even from this distance. Inside the compound, the remaining terrorists had barricaded themselves in a reinforced room on the ground floor. Through thermal imaging, Sarah could see their heat signatures, 8 bodies clustered together, weapons ready, clearly preparing for a final stand. The militia commander, a grizzled Afghan veteran with a magnificent beard, was organizing an assault on the barricaded room. But his fighters were exhausted, low on ammunition, and already bloodied from the initial breach. Reynolds reached the militia commander, began coordinating in broken Pashto, supplemented with hand signals. Doc Williams was already treating wounded, militia fighters, and even some of the captured terrorist defenders, his medical ethics refusing to distinguish between friend and enemy when lives could be saved. Sarah maintained her vigil, scope sweeping across potential threat points. A sniper's job was never finished until every friendly force was secure. Then movement caught her attention. A door on the compound's eastern side, previously unnoticed, began to open. 2 figures emerged, moving with tactical precision, weapons ready. They weren't militia fighters. Their movements were too disciplined, too professional. "Hayes, I've got 2 military-age males exiting the east door," Sarah transmitted. "They're moving toward the perimeter. Possible escape attempt." Through the scope, she studied them carefully. Both wore tactical vests over traditional clothing, a hybrid that marked them as higher-value targets than common fighters. One carried a satellite phone, the other a leather satchel that likely contained intelligence documents. "Those are probably Al Rahman's lieutenants," Hayes assessed. "If they escape, they'll reconstitute the cell. Viper, you are authorized to engage." The 2 men moved quickly along the compound wall, using shadows for concealment. They were heading for a gap in the perimeter where a vehicle waited, an escape plan probably prepared months ago for exactly this contingency. Sarah tracked the lead figure. Range, 1,207 meters. Moving target, low light conditions, target using cover effectively. This wasn't like shooting a static sentry. This was hunting someone who knew he was being hunted. She waited, patient as stone, for the perfect moment. The fundamentals of sniping: you don't force the shot, you allow it to happen. The lead figure paused at a gap in the wall, checking for threats before crossing the open ground to the vehicle. 3 seconds of exposure, maximum. Sarah's crosshairs settled on center mass. Her finger took up trigger slack. The world contracted to breathing and heartbeat, and the tiny space between decision and action. Shot. The figure collapsed mid-stride, the satellite phone clattering from dead fingers. The second man froze, shocked, trying to locate where death had come from. Fatal hesitation. Sarah cycled the bolt, acquired the second target, fired in one fluid motion. He dropped beside his companion, the leather satchel falling open to spill documents across the blood-stained ground. 2 more down, Spectre confirmed. "That's 11 confirmed kills. Viper, you're writing a masterclass in precision shooting tonight." Reynolds' voice came over the radio, tinged with something that might have been awe. "Viper, we just saw those 2 drop from here. You just took out Al Rahman's intelligence officer and communications chief. We've got their documents, phones, everything. This is an intelligence goldmine." Sarah allowed herself a tight smile. Not just a successful kill mission, but an intelligence windfall that would likely prevent future attacks and roll up associated terror networks. The militia fighters, with Reynolds coordinating and Doc Williams treating casualties, finally breached the barricaded room. The remaining terrorists, seeing their leadership dead and their position hopeless, surrendered. Within minutes, 8 more prisoners were being zip-tied and searched. The battle for the compound was over. Coalition quick reaction force helicopters began landing in the valley, disgorging teams of intelligence specialists, military police, and additional medical personnel. The entire scene transformed from combat zone to controlled chaos as the professionals took over. Hayes gave the order. All Viper elements prepare for extraction. Mission complete. Outstanding work, people. Sarah finally allowed herself to relax, rolling away from her shooting position for the first time in hours. Every muscle screamed protest. She'd been in the prone position for nearly 18 hours with only brief breaks. Her shoulders ached from the rifle's weight, her hip bones felt bruised from the rocky ground, and dehydration made her head pound despite careful water discipline. But she'd done it. 11 confirmed kills, including the primary target and his key lieutenants. 0 friendly casualties. 43 civilians rescued from execution. An imminent terrorist attack prevented. Not bad for someone they'd smirked at just 48 hours ago. Spectre began breaking down their hide site, carefully policing their brass and packing equipment. Viper, that was the finest shooting I've witnessed in 12 years of spotting. You just set a new standard. We did it together, Sarah replied, stretching cramped muscles. Spotter and shooter, it's always a team effort. Yeah, but I just called wind and distance. You're the one who had to make the shots count. Reynolds approached their position, moving with visible exhaustion. His uniform was soaked with sweat and someone else's blood, probably from helping Doc treat casualties. But his eyes were clear, focused, and carried something Sarah had never seen there before: genuine respect. He extended his hand. Lieutenant Commander Chen, I owe you an apology that goes way beyond what I said earlier. What you did tonight. That was the most professional, precise, lethal shooting I've ever witnessed. You saved lives down there. American lives, militia lives, civilian lives. Sarah shook his hand firmly. Thank you, Staff Sergeant, that means something. My daughter called me a dinosaur last month when I said women shouldn't be in combat, Reynolds continued, his voice rough. Guess she was right. You just proved that warriors come in all packages. It's the skill and heart that matters, not the gender. Tell her she's welcome to join, Sarah said. Tell her it won't be easy. She'll face doubters and people who want her to fail. But if she's got the determination, she'll make it. And it'll be worth every hard moment. Reynolds nodded, then headed toward the extraction point. Doc Williams appeared, his medical gloves stained red. Got 8 militia wounded stabilized, 3 critical but survivable. Also treated 4 enemy wounded. Everybody lives tonight, Viper. Thanks to you creating the conditions for success. The extraction helicopters orbited overhead, their pilots coordinating landing sequences. Sarah gathered her rifle case, pack, and equipment. Despite her exhaustion, she moved with practiced efficiency, a professional completing her mission to the very last detail. As she walked toward the landing zone, Sarah glanced back one final time at the compound. Smoke still rose from burning vehicles. Coalition forces moved through the structures with tactical precision. The bodies of terrorists who'd planned mass murder lay scattered across the courtyard. Justice had been served tonight, delivered from 1,200 meters away by a woman they'd smirked at, doubted, and dismissed. Sarah Chen had silenced the siege. And she'd done it with lethal, surgical precision that would be studied in sniper schools for years to come. The Black Hawk lifted off from the valley floor, rotors beating against thin mountain air as it climbed away from the compound. Sarah sat with her back against the cold metal hull, rifle case secured between her knees, watching the battlefield shrink below through the open door. Smoke still rose from the compound in dark columns that merged with the night sky. Coalition floodlights illuminated the scene as intelligence teams photographed bodies, cataloged weapons, and collected documents. The militia fighters had remained to help secure the site, their dead being prepared for burial with full honors. 43 civilians had been extracted alive, men, women and children who hours ago faced execution. Sarah could see them now, huddled near the medical tents, wrapped in emergency blankets, surrounded by interpreters and relief workers. 43 lives saved because she hadn't missed. The weight of that settled over her like a physical presence. 11 enemies killed, 11 precise shots at extreme range under combat conditions. But the real victory wasn't the kills. It was the lives preserved, the attack prevented, the future secured. Reynolds sat across from her, his eyes distant, processing what he'd witnessed. The flight back to Fob Atlas would take 40 minutes, and the helicopter's noise made conversation impossible without shouting. But words weren't necessary. Something fundamental had shifted between them during those hours on the mountain. Doc Williams dozed beside her, exhausted from treating casualties. His medical kit was nearly depleted. Bandages, morphine, IV bags all consumed in saving lives. His hands still bore traces of blood despite washing them 3 times. Lieutenant Hayes sat near the cockpit, coordinating with command via headset. Through the open channel, Sarah could hear Colonel Thornton's voice. "Outstanding work, Viper Element. Preliminary assessment is that you've disrupted a major terrorist network. Documents recovered include attack plans, cell phone contacts, and financial records. This is going to prevent attacks across the entire region." As the Black Hawk descended toward Fob Atlas, Sarah could see the entire base had turned out. Operators lined the landing pad. Support personnel emerged from bunkers. Even the base command staff had assembled despite the late hour. The helicopter touched down gently. Sarah was the last to exit, rifle case in hand, moving with the careful deliberation of someone whose body had been pushed to its limits. Colonel Thornton waited at the edge of the landing pad, his silver hair gleaming under the floodlights. As Sarah approached, he came to attention and rendered a crisp salute. She returned it, surprised. Full colonels didn't salute lieutenant commanders unless something significant had occurred. "Lieutenant Commander Chen," Thornton's voice carried across the tarmac, loud enough for everyone to hear. "Your actions tonight prevented a catastrophic terrorist attack on Bagram Air Base. Preliminary intelligence suggests al-Rahman's plan would have resulted in hundreds of casualties, American service members, coalition partners, and Afghan civilians." He stepped forward, his expression serious but his eyes warm. "You eliminated 11 hostile combatants with 11 shots at ranges exceeding 1,200 meters under combat conditions. You maintained fire discipline despite extreme pressure, ensuring 0 civilian casualties. You provided precision overwatch that enabled both militia forces and our quick reaction teams to secure the compound with minimal friendly losses." Thornton paused, letting his words sink in. "I'm recommending you for the Navy Cross. Your actions tonight exemplify the highest traditions of the naval special warfare community and the United States Navy." Applause erupted across the landing pad. Operators who'd served 20 years in special operations, veterans of Fallujah and Ramadi and Marja, clapped with genuine respect. This wasn't polite recognition. This was warriors acknowledging another warrior who'd performed at the absolute peak of human capability. Sarah stood at attention, uncomfortable with the attention but professional enough to accept it with grace. "Thank you, sir. I was doing my job. The team made it possible. Spectre's spotting was perfect. Lieutenant Hayes coordinated brilliantly, and the security element kept us protected. This was a team victory." "Modest as well as lethal," Thornton observed with a slight smile. "Dismissed, Lieutenant Commander. Get some food, some rest. Debrief at 900 tomorrow." The crowd began to disperse, but Reynolds lingered. As Sarah headed toward the armory to secure her weapon, he fell into step beside her. "Chen," he said quietly, using her name for the first time rather than her rank or call sign. "I need to say something, and I need you to hear it." Sarah stopped, turned to face him. The bravado was gone from his expression, replaced by something deeper, humility mixed with genuine regret. "I've been in the Marines for 15 years, Reynolds began. 3 combat deployments. I've worked with Delta, with DEVGRU, with the best operators in the world. And tonight, I watched you perform at a level I didn't think was humanly possible." He paused, choosing his words carefully. "But that's not what I need to apologize for. The shooting, the skill, that's just confirming what was already in your file, what you'd already proven 100 times before. What I need to apologize for is not seeing it, for letting my prejudices blind me to your capabilities, for assuming limitations that existed only in my head." Sarah remained quiet, letting him continue. "My daughter Emily, she's 17, wants to enlist next year. I've been fighting her on it, telling her the military isn't a place for women, that combat arms will chew her up and spit her out." Reynolds' voice cracked slightly. "I called her from the sat phone an hour ago, told her what I witnessed tonight, told her about you." "What did you say?" Sarah asked softly. "I told her that I watched a woman half my size carry the same combat load through the same brutal terrain as men twice her weight. I told her I watched that same woman make impossible shots under impossible conditions and save dozens of lives. I told her that warriors aren't defined by gender. They're defined by heart, skill, and the willingness to put their lives on the line for others." Reynolds met her eyes directly. "I told her that if she has even half the determination and courage you showed tonight, she'll make an outstanding Marine. And I told her I was wrong, about women in combat, about my assumptions, about everything I thought I knew." Sarah felt something loosen in her chest, a tension she'd carried for so long she'd almost forgotten it was there. "What did she say?" "She cried. Then she said, 'Dad, I've had Lieutenant Commander Chen's poster on my wall for 6 months. She's my hero. I'm glad you finally understand why.'" Reynolds smiled, a genuine expression that transformed his weathered face. "She's enlisting in January, infantry contract with the goal of trying out for Marine Raiders." "Tell her to contact me if she needs advice," Sarah offered. "The path isn't easy, but it's worth it. And tell her the military is changing. Slowly, but it's changing. By the time she's my rank, this conversation we're having won't even be necessary." "I hope you're right." Reynolds extended his hand again. "Thank you, Chen, for your service tonight, but also for changing my mind, for making me better." They shook hands, and Sarah saw in his eyes the same transformation she'd witnessed in dozens of men throughout her career. The moment when prejudice dissolved in the face of undeniable competence. As Reynolds walked away, Doc Williams approached, grinning. "You know you're going to be famous after this, right? 11 for 11 at extreme range, HVT eliminated, terrorist attack prevented. They'll be teaching this mission at sniper school for the next 20 years." Sarah grimaced. "I hate that. I didn't do this for recognition. I did it because it needed to be done." "I know, that's what makes you good at it." Doc's expression turned serious. "But whether you like it or not, you're a symbol now. Every woman who wants to serve in combat arms is going to hear about tonight. You're proving it's possible." "It shouldn't matter that I'm a woman," Sarah said quietly. "It should just matter that I'm a SEAL." "Agreed, but we're not there yet. So in the meantime, you're carrying extra weight, not just your mission load, but the burden of representation. How's that feel?" Sarah thought about it as they walked toward the armory. Heavy, unfair, but also important. If what I did tonight helps one woman believe she can do this, helps one commander see past gender to capability, then maybe the extra burden is worth it. Inside the armory, Sarah began the familiar ritual of weapon maintenance. She field-stripped her SR-25 with reverent care, cleaning each component with solvent-soaked patches, inspecting for wear or damage, oiling moving parts with precision. The rifle had performed flawlessly, 11 shots, 11 hits, 0 malfunctions. She owed it this careful maintenance, this respect for the tool that had made tonight's success possible. Spectre found her there an hour later, still working methodically through her cleaning routine. Viper, it's 300. You haven't slept in 36 hours. The rifle will still be there in the morning. Almost done, she replied, running a final patch through the barrel. Just need to finish this. Why, what's so important about cleaning it right now? Sarah paused, considering the question. Because this rifle saved 43 lives tonight. Because it helped prevent an attack that would have killed hundreds. Because 11 terrorists who were planning mass murder are dead because this weapon functioned perfectly when I needed it most. She locked the bolt back, inspected the chamber one final time. It deserves to be cared for properly, immediately. Not as a chore in the morning, but as an acknowledgement of what it helped me accomplish. Spectre nodded slowly. You know, most operators would just rack it and deal with it later. I'm not most operators. No, Spectre agreed. You're really not. Sarah reassembled the rifle, placed it carefully in its case, and secured the armory. Outside, the base had settled into its nighttime routine. Guards walking perimeters, generators humming, the distant sound of helicopters on patrol. She stood for a moment in the darkness, looking up at stars that blazed with crystalline clarity in the thin mountain air. Somewhere up there, satellites were probably relaying her mission reports back to the Pentagon, to Tampa, to wherever admirals and generals made decisions about wars and warriors. But down here, on this dusty forward operating base in Afghanistan, Sarah Chen was just a tired operator who'd done her job and done it well. The smirks were gone now. The doubt, the skepticism, the assumption that she didn't belong, all silenced as completely as the siege she'd ended from 1,200 meters away. She'd proven herself again, like she'd proven herself 100 times before, like she'd probably have to prove herself 100 times more before the military fully accepted women in combat roles. But tonight she could rest knowing that somewhere, a 17-year-old girl named Emily was looking at a poster and believing that anything was possible. That made the burden worth carrying. Sarah headed toward her bunk, her body finally acknowledging the exhaustion that came with 36 hours of continuous operations. Tomorrow would bring debriefs, paperwork, and mission analysis. But tonight, she'd sleep knowing she'd made a difference. And really, what more could any warrior ask for? 3 days after the mission, Sarah sat in Colonel Thornton's office, the air conditioning fighting a losing battle against the Afghan heat. The room smelled of old coffee and the leather of well-worn field manuals lining the shelves. Thornton slid a folder across his desk, the Navy Cross recommendation form visible through the transparent cover. This goes to SOCOM today. Given the tactical success, the lives saved, and the strategic intelligence recovered, I expect it'll be approved within 60 days. Sarah stared at the paperwork, her emotions complicated. Pride, certainly. Recognition from peers meant everything in the special operations community, but also discomfort with the spotlight that would inevitably follow. Sir, I appreciate the recognition, but I need you to understand something. She met his eyes directly. I didn't do this to be the first female SEAL to accomplish anything. I did it because Khalid al-Rahman needed to be stopped, and I had the skills to stop him. Thornton leaned back in his chair, a knowing smile crossing his weathered features. Chen, whether you wanted it or not, you're a trailblazer. That mission is already being analyzed at Fort Benning, at Quantico, at the Naval Special Warfare Center. Not just as a tactical case study, but as proof that women can perform at the highest levels of combat operations. He tapped the folder. The question isn't whether you wanted this responsibility. The question is what you're going to do with it now that you have it. Sarah had been wrestling with that exact question for 3 days. What do you recommend, sir? Be yourself. Be professional. Keep doing what you do better than almost anyone alive, making impossible shots and bringing your team home safely. Thornton's expression turned serious. But also understand that every young woman who wants to serve in combat arms is watching you now. Every commander making decisions about integration is looking at your performance. Like it or not, you're carrying more than just your own reputation. Sarah nodded slowly. She'd always known this, had felt the weight of representation since the day she pinned on the trident. But the successful mission had amplified everything: the scrutiny, the expectations, the symbolic importance. I can do that, sir, as long as the focus stays on mission accomplishment, not on making political statements. Agreed. Now get out of my office. You've got a debrief with the intelligence team in 30 minutes. Sarah stood, saluted, and turned to leave. At the door she paused. Sir, one question: did you doubt me? Before the mission, did you think I could do it? Thornton considered his answer carefully. Honestly, I looked at your file and saw one of the best trained snipers in naval special warfare. Your gender didn't factor into my tactical assessment. But would I have bet money on you making 11 consecutive hits at extreme range under combat stress? He smiled. Nobody's that good, Chen. Nobody except you, apparently. Outside, the Afghan sun blazed at its zenith. Sarah walked toward the operations center, passing groups of operators who nodded respectfully as she went by. The atmosphere had fundamentally changed. She was no longer the outsider proving herself, but a respected member of the combat community. Reynolds intercepted her near the chow hall, holding his sat phone. Chen, got a minute? Emily wants to talk to you. Sarah took the phone, stepping into the shade of a supply bunker. This is Lieutenant Commander Chen. Ma'am, this is Emily Reynolds. The voice was young, eager, with her father's Texas accent softened by youth. My dad told me what you did. I needed to say thank you. Thank me for what? For showing me it's possible. I've wanted to serve since I was 12, but everyone kept telling me combat arms wasn't for women, that I should be a nurse or an admin specialist. Even my dad, her voice caught slightly, especially my dad kept saying I'd never make it, that I should choose something easier. Sarah leaned against the bunker wall, remembering her own journey, the doubters, the naysayers, the 100 people who'd told her to quit. Emily, I'm going to tell you something important. The path you're choosing isn't easy. You'll face people who don't want you there. You'll have to work twice as hard for half the recognition. There will be days when you question whether it's worth it. But is it worth it, I mean? Sarah thought about the past 72 hours. The brutal insertion, the 18-hour surveillance, the 11 shots that saved 43 lives and prevented hundreds of deaths. She thought about Reynolds' transformation from skeptic to ally, about Doc Williams' quiet professionalism, about proving that competence transcended gender. Yes, she said firmly, it's absolutely worth it, but not because you're proving something to the doubters. They'll always exist. It's worth it because when you're lying on a mountain at 300, freezing and exhausted, knowing that your team depends on you, knowing that innocent lives depend on you getting the job done right, in that moment, you discover who you really are. You discover your limits are so much further than you ever imagined. Emily's voice strengthened. My dad said you never rang the bell during Hell Week, that you could have quit 100 times but didn't. That's true. The bell was right there, offering an end to the suffering. But Emily, here's the secret. The bell is always there. Not just in training, but throughout your career. Every hard moment, every time someone tells you that you don't belong, every time your body screams at you to quit, that's the bell ringing. And you have to choose over and over not to ring it back. How do you do that? How do you keep choosing not to quit? Sarah smiled, remembering her own mentors who'd helped her through dark moments. You remember why you started. For me, it was wanting to serve at the highest level, wanting to be part of something bigger than myself. On my worst day of Hell Week, hour 97, hypothermic and hallucinating, I remembered my grandfather's Navy Cross from Vietnam. I thought about him choosing to serve despite impossible odds. That got me through the next minute. Then I focused on the minute after that. You don't survive Hell Week all at once. You survive it 1 minute at a time. Dad said you're going to be famous after this mission, that they'll teach about you at sniper school. Maybe, but Emily, that's not why I did it. I did it because it was my job, because people needed help, because I had the skills to make a difference." Sarah's voice turned serious. "If you enlist, do it for the right reasons. Do it because you want to serve, because you want to protect people, because you believe in something bigger than yourself. Don't do it to prove anyone wrong or to make a political statement. Do it because it's your calling." "It is my calling," Emily said with quiet conviction. "I've known since I was 12 years old. I'm supposed to be a Marine." "Then be a Marine. Be the best Marine you can be. Work harder than everyone else. Never ask for special treatment. Never make excuses. And when you succeed, and you will succeed if you have the determination, do it with enough grace that you make it easier for the women who come after you." They talked for another 10 minutes, about training, about preparation, about what Emily should expect in boot camp. When the call ended, Sarah felt simultaneously exhausted and energized. The weight of representation was heavy, but moments like this made it meaningful. She found Spectre in the operations center, poring over mission footage and data analysis. "You know they're already writing this up for the Special Operations Community Journal," he said without preamble. "Extreme Range Precision Fire, a case study in modern sniper operations." Sarah groaned. "They're not using my name, are they?" "Oh, they're absolutely using your name. You're about to become the most famous sniper since Chris Kyle, except you're still alive and still operating." Spectre grinned. "How does it feel to be a legend?" "Uncomfortable. I just want to do my job." "Too late for that. You're a symbol now, whether you like it or not." That evening, Sarah walked to the base perimeter as the sun set over the Afghan mountains. The same peaks where she'd lain in wait, where she'd made 11 impossible shots, where she'd silenced a siege and saved countless lives. The compound was still visible in the distance, now occupied by coalition forces and Afghan security. The terrorist cell was destroyed, its leaders dead, its plans thwarted. Intelligence recovered from the site had already led to raids across 3 provinces, rolling up associated networks. One mission, 11 bullets, ripple effects that would prevent attacks for years to come. Doc Williams found her there, 2 cups of coffee in hand. He offered her one without speaking, and they stood together watching the mountains turn purple in the fading light. "What are you thinking about?" he finally asked. "About all the missions I've been on, all the times I've had to prove myself, all the people who doubted." Sarah sipped the bitter coffee. "And about how this mission, this one night, might mean the next generation of women won't have to prove quite as much. That's the hope, anyway." "You think it'll actually change things? Or will the next woman in combat arms face the same skepticism, the same smirks, the same assumptions?" Doc considered the question carefully. "Change happens slowly in the military, but every barrier that breaks makes it easier for the next person. You broke barriers tonight, Viper. Maybe not all of them, but enough that Emily Reynolds and girls like her have a clearer path forward." Sarah thought about the 17-year-old girl who'd called her a hero, who kept her poster on the wall, who believed service was possible because Sarah had proven it was. "Then I guess the burden was worth carrying." "The burden is always worth carrying if it helps others," Doc replied. "That's what service means." They stood in companionable silence as stars began to emerge in the darkening sky. Somewhere up there, satellites were probably still processing intelligence from the mission. In Tampa, at SOCOM headquarters, analysts were writing reports. At the Pentagon, admirals were being briefed on the tactical success. But down here, Sarah Chen was just an operator watching the sunset, drinking bad coffee with a friend, and reflecting on a job well done. The smirks were gone. The doubt had been silenced as completely as the siege. And somewhere in America, a 17-year-old girl was looking at a poster and believing that anything was possible. Sarah raised her coffee cup toward the distant mountains, a private toast to the mission, to the team, to everyone who'd ever doubted and been proven wrong. To the next generation, she said quietly. To the next generation, Doc echoed. They drank to that, to the future operators who would walk easier paths because Sarah Chen had walked difficult ones first, to the women who would serve without having to prove their right to be there, to a military slowly, painfully, inevitably evolving toward true equality. The siege had been silenced, but the real victory wasn't the 11 terrorists killed or the hundreds of lives saved. The real victory was the barriers shattered, the assumptions demolished, and the path blazed for everyone who would come after. Sarah Viper Chen had done more than complete a mission. She'd changed what was possible. And as the Afghan night settled over Fob Atlas, as the stars blazed overhead and the mountains stood eternal witness, one thing was absolutely certain. Nobody would ever smirk at her again. The end.